Well, good morning. I'm your host for Voices from the Dust this Tuesday morning, the 7th day of July, 2015. Looks like we got some shaky audio for some reason. I hope it's going to come out all right. But anyway, we welcome you to our show where, just a minute, I'm trying to adjust the audio so it looks a little better, but I don't know how it's going to come out.
Sounds good,
Anyway, huh? Hi there, Roy. How are you this morning?
Good.
How's the audio?
The audio's still a little bit. I'm getting it.
Yeah, it shows it like shaky. Not sure what the problem is, but it doesn't look right. But anyway, well, I guess we'll just continue and cross our fingers that it will come out all right.
You sound
We welcome everybody to our show where we share the reason for the hope within us, the reason why the Latter-day Saints are Christians, and the reason why you should be too. Our message not only explains what distinguishes LDS Christian doctrine from non-LDS Christian doctrine, but also why the Latter-day Saints have declared since 1845 that the only salvation remaining for the Gentiles is for them to repent and to be baptized, and thus to be identified in the same covenant, the new covenant, with Israel, and worship at the altar of Israel. This is an important thing to understand, and we've talked about it from lots of different perspectives ever since we started the program 2 years ago this August. And you can access those past episodes on our website, voicesfromthedust.org. voicesfromthedust.org. Just go there and click on the menu item TV. You can watch the program live there, or below the live player you can access the past episodes that are indexed by month, or you can click on any of the links there for our YouTube channel, our Google Plus page, or our Facebook page, which also has them archived. So anyway, yeah, so how what do you think? How's it sound? It looks a little shaky on the playback thing there. Well, anyway, we're glad to have my brother Roy here with us.
It sounds good.
Okay, good. I won't look at that shaky monitor. It's my fault. I messed with the thing over the weekend, and I knew I'd have problems if I touched it. But anyway, we'll go with it. Well, last week we discussed the writings of people as a result of the Supreme Court, the reactions of many people as a result of the Supreme Court decision. We read the Psalms 92, and we talked about how all this is going to come together. And the title for today's program is There No Other Way. That should have a question mark on it. I guess it does. And that comes from the question that Eve asked, her response to Satan. And there's a book out, at least one with that same title, but it has to do with our having to wade through evil and choose between good and evil. Adam and Eve received the knowledge of good and evil. Satan told them that they would be as the gods, knowing good and evil, which means that gods do know good and evil, and they became fallen man, knowing good and evil because they disobeyed God. But they also had this knowledge of good and evil as the gods do, so that changed everything. Now, given that man has become as the gods, knowing both good and evil, it seems that there's no limit to either. We've learned that man can be good and very good. The greatest example of good we see, of course, is the willingness of the Son of Man to descend below all things in order to rescue mankind from death and hell. But on the other hand, we've learned that man can be evil, very evil. The greatest example of evil that we see is the willingness of the Son of the Morning, as he's called, to exalt himself above the stars of God in order to make the world a wilderness and to destroy the cities thereof, and to refuse to open the house of his prisoners, because he has many, many prisoners that he's taken captive. But mankind could not have imagined the depths of the heartache, the misery, and the grief, the unrelenting bloodshed, nor the incredible hypocrisy which has been played out upon the face of this earth since the beginning of his tenure here, when the children of men first began to choose between good and evil. To know and understand it all, man had to experience it. There's just no other way. It needs be that offenses come, the Savior said, but woe unto him by whom they come. And so here we are in this great drama, and such is the drama of this second estate. We've kept our first estate, and now we're here into the second estate, which all mortals must pass through. And we find ourselves here, but we have to experience the deceit, the lies, the sorrow for the sins of the world, and be able to discern between falsehood and truth. Pilate asked Jesus, "What is truth?" he said, because he couldn't discern it, obviously, or he wouldn't have asked the question. And he knew that he couldn't discern it. But even though Jesus knew the truth, he couldn't explain it to Pilate any more than a pet owner can explain the human dilemma to his pet. They exist in two different worlds, where one experiences something that the other can't comprehend. So there's this great gulf then between the person who chooses to follow light and truth, as Adam and Eve did, and the one who chooses not to do that, as many of their children did. But most of the time this difference is manifest on a personal level, such as portrayed in the parable of Lazarus the beggar, who was laid at the rich man's door, where they both then end up dying and experience the judgment of God in different ways. That's a personal view of our dilemma. But there's also a time when this difference is experienced in mass by a nation on a national level, as we find recorded in the Bible when Israel rejects her God and suffers the travails of exile and punishment. There were two ways laid before the nation of Israel by their prophet Moses. They could choose to either follow the Lord their God, who had delivered them out of the captivity of Egypt with the strength of his own arm, or they could choose to reject him and his ways and his commandments and follow false gods of wood and stone, made out of wood and stone and metal. But choosing to follow God faithfully, he revealed to them, Moses taught them, would lead to the wonderful blessings from a loving, all-powerful Father in heaven. But choosing to reject him and following after falsehood would lead to pain and grief and misery such as they could not comprehend. Well, if they would have chosen good and they would have had these blessings, our world would have been a much different world. But of course, as we know, the greater part of them chose to follow false gods and to believe the deceit and the lies of idolatry. And all that led to the sore curses of darkness and misery which they have suffered now for so many years, so many centuries. And then the same thing, only much worse, happened to Christians in America. The voices from the dust tell us that they sold their Savior for silver and for gold, and for that which moth corrupts and which thieves break through and steal. And in that day the Lord visited them in turning their works upon their own heads. So then we read how Mormon described their awful doom, how that they were once a delightsome people, and how that they had had Christ for their shepherd, yea, how that they were led even by God the Father. But after they had rejected their God, they were led about by Satan, even as chaff is driven before the wind, Mormon says, or as a vessel is tossed upon the waves without sail or anchor, or without anything wherewith to steer her. And even as she is, so are they, he said. Later on, as their leader, Mormon describes some of the awful things that they did to one another, which grieved his soul to the point that he cried out, "Oh, the depravity of my people! They are without order and without mercy. Behold, I am but a man, and I have but the strength of a man, and I cannot any longer enforce my commands. And they have become strong in their perversions, and they are alike brutal, sparing none, neither old nor young, and they delight in everything save that which is good. And the suffering of our women and our children upon all the face of this land doth exceed everything. Yea, tongue cannot tell, neither can it be written," he says. Now, Mormon was a faithful, righteous Christian whom the people had appointed to be their leader, but he knew their cause was hopeless because they had rejected the living God after having known him, see? And that's the situation that we're in now, because Christianity isn't like the ancient Jews who never really, never knew Christ the way we did after his coming, and we have a knowledge of him after his coming that has been recorded and we've been able to see and understand, and people have testified that they have felt the wounds in his hands and in his feet and in his side, and they testify that he is the Son of God, that they bore testimony of his resurrection from the dead and the resurrection of all men. So that places the modern Christian world in a totally different category than it did the Jews who didn't believe before he came. So we see here now these American Christians being totally destroyed because they had such great knowledge of the Savior and then turned from him. And Mormon lived to see their complete destruction, and he lamented the loss of them, and he recorded in these immortal words, "And my soul was rent," he said, "with anguish because of the slain of my people. And I cried, O ye fair ones, how could ye have departed from the ways of the Lord? O ye fair ones, how could ye have rejected that Jesus who stood with open arms to receive you? Behold, if ye had not done this, ye would not have fallen. But behold, ye are fallen, and I mourn your loss, O ye fair sons and daughters, ye fathers and mothers, ye husbands and wives, ye fair ones, how is it that ye could have fallen? But behold, ye are gone, and my sorrows cannot bring your return. And the day soon cometh that your mortal must put on immortality." That means that they would soon be resurrected, of course. "And these bodies which are now moldering in corruption," and he was looking at them there. I watched the show a little bit. I couldn't watch it all because it's too long, but I watched Braveheart over the 4th of July. And the destruction portrayed there was just a portion of what Mormon must have seen as their bodies were slain and strewn across the ground as far as I could see. And he says, "And these bodies which are now moldering in corruption must soon become incorruptible bodies, and then you must stand before the judgment seat of Christ to be judged according to your works. And if it so be that ye are righteous, then are ye blessed with your fathers who have gone before you. Oh, that ye had repented, though, before this great destruction had come upon you. But behold, ye are gone. And the Father, yea, the eternal Father of heaven, knoweth your state, and he doeth with you according to his justice and his mercy." So Mormon knew these people just as we know, just as we have children and we have friends and we have neighbors and fellow citizens today that we see and interact with or watch on TV and know because we have seen them in various situations. He grew up with them and saw them in various situations. He laughed with them. He mourned with them. He went to funerals. He sported himself among them. But he had to watch them ultimately go down as they degenerated into fiends of hell when the gross darkness of Satan overtook them. And this awful, distressing image of a lost generation gives us to understand the great drama of this second estate that we now find ourselves in, with its potential perils and disasters that can prove to be only too real if we reject the light and truth and virtue in our lives. Jesus captured the essence of this experience in our mortal probation with these succinct and powerful words of truth coming through modern revelation. He said, "Thus saith the Lord your God, even Jesus Christ, the great I am, Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the same which looked upon the wide expanse of eternity and all the seraphic hosts of heaven before the world was made, the same which knoweth all things, for all things are present before mine eyes. I am the same which spake, and the world was made, and all things came by me. I am the same which have taken the Zion of Enoch into mine own bosom. And verily I say, even as many as have believed in my name, for I am Christ, and in mine own name, by the virtue of the blood which I have spilt, have I pleaded before the Father for them. But behold, the residue of the wicked have I kept in chains of darkness, until the judgment of the great day which shall come at the end of the earth." See, this is what Mormon was lamenting, because he knew that they were reserved in chains of darkness until that judgment day would come, when they'd be raised from the dead, but only to stand before the God of heaven and earth to be judged of their sins. "And even so," he says, "will I cause the wicked to be kept, that will not hear my voice, but harden their hearts. And woe, woe, woe is their doom. But behold, verily, verily, I say unto you, that mine eyes are upon you. I am in your midst, and ye cannot see me," he says to the righteous. "But the day soon cometh that ye shall see me, and know that I am. For the veil of darkness shall soon be rent, and he that is not purified shall not abide the day." That's the end of the quote. So many people, though, reject these words, saying that the Mormons worship a different Jesus, one that is the figment of Joseph Smith's imagination. But I assure you this is a lie. These are they who are the servants of Satan, cunningly seeking to harden the hearts and blind the minds of the people so that they will not believe the words of life. And then they go on to choose darkness when they reject the truth. As I saw, oh my goodness, my own children on Facebook adopting the rainbow colors on their profile pictures to identify themselves with the homosexual crowd after the decision of the Supreme Court justices, the majority of them ruling that all the states should recognize and even solemnize sodomite relationships. So this war between good and evil continues now on a national level, and as we see people from all over the world, it's even an international level, because they identify and are persuaded by these things. So it's reached an epic proportion as a majority of the judges of the U.S. Supreme Court have declared the sin of sodomy should be legalized and solemnized by the governments of all 50 states. But what we need to understand regarding that is it's not just an issue of equality that everybody's been stampeded into believing. It's not an issue of equality before the law as it's cast by so many who are the hapless victims of unrecognized cultural drivers, but it is a tactic of the enemy which he intends to use to destroy us and to destroy the vineyard of the Lord. Quoting from a recent WorldNet Daily article by Paul Bremer, quote, supporters of same-sex marriage may think they're simply making the world a fairer and more equal place, but they are unwittingly helping the radical left destroy marriage and the family, according to professor and author Paul Kengor. And then he quotes Paul Kengor. Quote, those advocates of same-sex marriage have no idea that advocacy fuels and fits the much more radical left's agenda, radical left being communist, socialist, radical, secular, progressive left, Kengor told WND, WorldNet Daily, for the typical same-sex marriage supporter. They have benevolent motives. Let me read that again. For the typical same-sex marriage supporter, they have benevolent motives. They're aiming for what they call marriage equality, quote unquote, for extending a new right to a larger group of people. So they feel very justified in doing that. And they've been programmed in the schools to do that, the millennial generation, and especially it's really getting bad now. It's they're just teaching them right out sex and perversion in the schools beyond belief. But to go on with his quote, but for the radical far left, so he's saying these people have benevolent reasons, but for the radical far left they have malevolent motives with this. Okay, so we have the benevolent motives of the duped, if you will, and the malevolent motives of the radical left, the communists, the socialists, the global elite that are pushing all of this. He says, I mean, they've been looking to take down the family for 2 centuries. And in same-sex marriage, they finally have the vehicle to make it happen. Now, when you think of 2 centuries, that's all our country is 2 centuries old, essentially. And that's when, we'll talk more about it later, but that's when the Lord, even less than 2 centuries ago, commanded his servants to build the tower in the midst of the vineyard so that they could see and understand these plans of these people who have been looking to take down the family for all these centuries. But of course they didn't understand, and they didn't build the tower, and as a result now we are where we are today. Kengor is an expert on the history and strategies of the left, writes Bremer, I think, Paul Bremer. He has spent his academic career studying communism, socialism, totalitarianism, progressivism, and the Cold War. He recently applied his research to the current same-sex marriage. Oh, I forgot to switch this to voice, darn it. He recently applied his research to the current same-sex marriage debate by writing the new book, Takedown, From Communist to Progressive, How the Left Has Sabotaged Family and Marriage. That's the title of his book. Well, I got some clips here where we can listen to Mr. Kengor explain from a scholarly point of view what the prophet David O. McKay and Ezra Taft Benson taught from inspiration many years ago, that the enemy of God is hard at work to destroy the work of God on a national level as well as on a personal level. Even though back then they knew nothing of the enemy's tactic, his strategy actually in the form of the sexual revolution and ultimately the legalization of same-sex marriage. So we'll play that clip and discuss it on the other side here.
So, but this is the kind of thing that I think is only going to get worse as the nation becomes more secular, as the nation becomes more pro-gay marriage, and more intolerant of religious people, religious believers, and the rights of those people.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Dr. Paul Kengor. He's the author of the new book, Takedown. It's available through WorldNet Daily, their publishing arm, WND.com, or I assume any other major internet site like Amazon.com. And before I go to my co-host, Jerry Kinney, for some questions, I did want to ask you, Paul, because we can't get into the whole book. It's a very complex subject, and you deal with a lot of different progressive organizations and the individuals that are part of it. But when you research this book, what surprised you the most about this topic and who was involved and how it came to be?
Well, I don't know that I was all that surprised, unfortunately, Cliff. And some people have said, look, you're a historian of the Cold War, communism, these different ideologies, and why do you want to wade into this culture war issue? And well, I had to get into it because I know this history. I know I've lectured about what Marx has said about the family, Marx's own personal family behavior, which was appalling, Engels and his views on it. I know about the cultural Marxists and their views of sexuality. I know what the Bolsheviks did to marriage and family. Unbelievable. I mean, just decimated the family. I know what Mao did. I know what the Cambodians did. I know what Fidel Castro did. In fact, that was one of the big wake-ups. I know that Fidel Castro has always been probably the most militantly anti-homosexual leader on the planet. And now all of a sudden, Cuba is holding gay pride parades. And Castro's niece says that not only is he pro-gay and pro-gay marriage, but that he's done some advocacy work. Really? Why? Why the sudden change here? And for me, it all makes sense. Because Fidel Castro is still a communist. He's never changed on that. But it all makes sense if you look at this 200-year long process, long march, cultural revolution, where the goal has always been to reshape the family, redefine the family. And the one thing too, Cliff, that they all have in common, whether you're talking about, because obviously today, and I want to make this so clear, the typical gay marriage supporter today is obviously not a closet commie looking to take down the family, right? They believe that they're extending new rights to new people. They think that they're doing a benevolent, positive thing. I get that. I don't understand. I don't agree, but I get that. But what they all have in common is that whether you're talking about Marx or Engels or Herbert Marcuse or Wilhelm Reich or the Frankfurt School of Cultural Marxists or the early socialist utopians or the secular progressive today, and even some non-left gay marriage advocates today, they all believe that they should have, that they can render unto themselves the right to redefine marriage and family whatever way they choose. And they believe that the idea of a fixed absolute definition of marriage and family by nature, by God, by tradition is wrong. It's something that they ought to be able to personally redefine. And they have that in common with all of these earlier far left forebears. And now it all comes together in this gay marriage movement, which will successfully forever redefine, smash the 2,000-year-old Western standard for marriage as between one man and one woman.
Talking to Dr. Paul Kengor, his latest book is called Takedown. It's on America's cultural collapse and the forces from within that are bringing this about. He's also written a number of great books over the years about the religious backgrounds, histories, and views of such people as Hillary Clinton and Ronald Reagan. Plus, before Takedown, he had the great book on Barack Obama's communist mentor, a communist named Frank Marshall Davis. But ladies and gentlemen, you need to get this book. It's available through WND Books, WorldNet Daily, also other sites, because in my view, most people have tended to think of Marxism as an economic theory. And they don't understand the social dimensions of this threat. But that's what this book is all about, because as Paul has mentioned, and he's quoted directly from the Communist Manifesto, it's in the Communist Manifesto where they call for the abolition of the family. And this has been going on. We look back at some of these anti-communist investigations in the 40s and 50s, which looked at communists in government, spies, and espionage. All of this has been going on at the same time, and they've won. It's seemingly they're on the verge of winning, taking down, as Paul puts it in the title of his book, the greatest country on earth. Let me hand it over to you, Jerry.
Cliff, can I have one thing on that? Sorry, Jerry, but and what happened too, in particular, in the 1900s, in 1920s, 30s, and 40s, is a brand new group of Marxists. They would eventually form the New Left, but they realized that the economic class redistribution ideas, they weren't going to win for the Marxist revolution, because free markets would always blow away collectivized economies. So they looked to take down the West and Western culture and the Western system through culture. And these folks were the cultural Marxists. They came out of the Frankfurt School. George Lukács was a founder. Herbert Marcuse, the father of the New Left in the 1960s in America. Weather Underground, all these different people read Marcuse. He was a hero to them. His books, Eros and Civilization, and I mean, these books sold hundreds of thousands of copies. George Lukács, Wilhelm Reich, Willy Munzenberg, they understood that if you really wanted to take it down, if you really wanted to take down the West, and remake the society, you needed to do it through culture, education, and in particular with sex. And the gap that they looked to fill the Marxist superstructure was not economic, but it was psychological, it was sexual, and in particular, I know this sounds crazy and almost conspiratorial, but it's true. This is what happened. And in fact, early on, they did intend it as a conspiracy, but what they in particular, they used Freudianism. And Reich and these other guys created a form of Freudian Marxism, of sexual Marxism. Wilhelm Reich wrote The Sexual Revolution after he came back from touring Moscow in the 1920s, 1930s circa. So I lay all that out in the book. But so their Marxist goal was to make it happen through culture.
And this is, I'm going to hand it off to Jerry. This is so critical, this point you make, because they couldn't conquer us through Soviet military power. Reagan stood up to that. He forced them to back down. As you point out, Marxism as an economic theory just doesn't work. We continue to see examples of that all over the world, especially in places like Venezuela or Cuba itself. And they couldn't do it through armed revolution within the United States, through groups like the FALN, the Weather Underground, and so forth. And there's, it seems to me, where the Marxists wised up, so to speak, where you had people like Bernardine Dorn and Bill Ayers, after trying to kill cops and setting off bombs, decided, aha, we're going to go into academia. That's where the real revolution. But of course, in your book, Paul, you talk about how they've infiltrated not only academia to bring about the revolution, but the media, the internet. But I don't want to go on too long, because I do want to turn it over to Jerry. Jerry?
Dr. Kenger, it's an honor to have you on the program.
Thank you.
I finished your book late last night, and so needless to say, I didn't get a whole lot of sleep.
Pretty depressing, isn't it?
It's very, very disturbing. And I've, as I said earlier before we went on the air, I've known about a lot of this stuff, but I've never heard it all put together quite like that. But it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that political correctness, and I love that name, I mean, they're so great at picking these names, correct, like it's correct. But basically, political correctness is at the heart of bringing about cultural change and cultural Marxism. And as I understand it, back with the old Soviets, there used to be a saying, one man, one problem, no man, no problem, that if somebody wasn't thinking right, they would just execute them. But today's version, if they're not thinking right, then we need to silence them.
Right.
And that's really what political correctness is all about. And we see it even on programs like Fox News, where they don't talk about gay marriage, or they talk about marriage equality. And we see it in schools where, as you bring out in the book, Obama's Safe Schools czar actually used bullying as a means to get to talk to grade school students about gay rights.
Right.
So is the key to this? I mean, as you bring out in the book, you say there's 20% that are hardcore left, 20% that are hardcore right, and there's the 60% in the middle. And with political correctness, if they could silence the 20% on the right, the 60% in the middle would go the way of the left because of the spiral of silence. So is the way to counter this for people to speak out against this cultural decline that we have in this country?
Well, those numbers, Jerry, 20, 20, 60, that was from Kevin Jennings. And it's a very perceptive point. And his point of view was the 20% that he framed as intolerant, nasty, hate mongers who are against gay rights and gay marriage and so forth, that they would just ignore them or silence them. Well, what they're going to do now is they're not even just going to ignore them. They're going to sue them. They're going to picket them. They're going to demonize them. They're going to really, I mean, there's an incredible intolerance there. They want to hammer them into submission. Political correctness is just another word for left-wing intolerance. And what's fascinating there, Herbert Marcuse, probably the most influential person who came out of the cultural school, the Frankfurt School of Cultural Marxism, taught at Yale, Brandeis, University of California system, and of course Columbia. I mean, they almost all go through Columbia. Columbia is a magnet for the. I think Columbia is more mentioned in the index of my book than anything else. But Marcuse wrote a very well-known piece where he talked about repressive tolerance, and he said there his idea was that we need to tolerate ideas from the left, but not tolerate ideas from the right, and that has really lived on. And what's a shame though about this is if your position on marriage is that of 99.99% of every human being who ever bestrode the planet, and that would be the pro-traditional marriage position, that suddenly puts you on the right. that's crazy, right? It suddenly makes you an outlier, an extremist, a radical. So if you have the position on marriage that the entire Democratic Party, both Clintons and Obama, had 20 years ago, you're suddenly now on the right. You know, you're a fanatic, and you shouldn't be tolerated. So there again, you have this very Marcusean type idea. And I should add here too, just to clarify to both of you, I'm not expecting to stop this, and I don't think my book is going to make any difference in it. I think that this country and this culture will redefine marriage. We saw the numbers from Gallup or Pew a few weeks ago on the number of Christians in the country is now down to about 71%. That's plummeting very, very quickly. So, which means, and the secular folks are as militant and aggressive and ferocious as ever. And in fact, they blame so many ills for all of humanity, they lay them at the feet of religious people. So I see this country and culture as absolutely redefining marriage, if not by the Supreme Court in June 2015, then in 2016 or at some point. But I would like people to at least be aware of the deeper, darker ideological historical forces at work here that they are unknowingly and truly unknowingly aiding and abetting. It's going to lead to a fundamental transformation of marriage and family that we have no idea what the effect of this is going to be on society. Other than, well, look, you could look at some other cultures and other groups where single parent homes and the proliferation has been bad. It's been economically devastating. People should have, you should strive for a home with a mom and a dad. But the left is hell-bent on going into this new experiment as if it's not an experiment at all. And anybody who disagrees with their charge forward, again, is some sort of retrograde, reactionary fanatic.
Retrograde, reactionary, and that's how they've demonized this conspiratorial. They've used all these words. They use language to great effect, but you can't help but wonder how, if the church had built the tower, if the Lord's servants had built the tower, and they had been diligently watching these developments from way back, then the result would be much different, and we wouldn't be facing the disaster that we're facing now. Of course, this clip was made shortly before the Supreme Court's decision, so they didn't even know at that point in time that they probably could have guessed like the rest of us, but it's really something to actually see it as an accomplished fact. But we didn't see this in the proper context, which Paul is trying to help us understand. This is, we need help in helping people to see that this homosexual issue is part and parcel of the enemy's attack upon the vineyard. But not only did the champions of liberty not understand the use of the sexual revolution as a tool of the enemy, but it was not even really understood by all the enemy until fairly recently with Fidel Castro, like he said, pointing out that Castro didn't even realize it. This shift in strategy from the Cold War's economic strategy to the cultural war's religious strategy, we put that in quotes because that's really what it is. It might have been a surprise to Fidel Castro, but I doubt if it would have been all that much of a surprise to Nikita Khrushchev, who told Elder Taft Benson in the early 60s that the United States would fall into communist hands like overripe fruit. Now, he was thinking again in terms of the economic weakening that they were doing, conspiring to economically ruin the United States. But he would have really understood the switch from that to the cultural battle much quicker, I think, than those of us who now, with a great deal of hindsight and being taught by people who have studied it, like Dr. Kindgren, we can see it now, but he would have seen it even back then. And Glenn Beck actually commented on the audio of Elder Benson's encounter, or his accounting, his retelling the story as how he encountered Nikita Khrushchev on this when Khrushchev told him that his grandchildren would grow up under communism. So let's play that clip. That's really interesting, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
I want you to listen to this. This is audio that came from the 1960s. Now, you have to put this into context. This is the 1960s. We're talking about the former Soviet Union. Remember how we used to view communism? Remember how we used to view the Soviets? They were an evil, godless empire that were hell-bent to destroy us and destroy our way of life. It is true that's who they were. Well, when Khrushchev came over, remember, he pounded his shoe. He met with a guy who was the Secretary of Agriculture for the Eisenhower administration. His name was Ezra Taft Benson. And then also talked to him about agriculture in the Soviet Union. This is what Ezra Taft Benson said about that meeting. And listen carefully, especially towards the end. This is what he said about that meeting with Khrushchev and the communists back in the 1960s. Special note. And remember that Ezra Taft Benson's grandchildren are probably about your age now, if you're in your 40s or 50s. Listen carefully.
I have personally witnessed the heart-rending results of the loss of freedom. I have talked face to face with the godless communist leaders. It may surprise you to learn that I was host to Mr. Khrushchev for a half day when he visited the United States. Not that I'm proud of it. I opposed his coming then, and I still feel it was a mistake to welcome this atheistic murderer as a state visitor. As we talked face to face, he indicated that my grandchildren would live under communism. After assuring him that I expected to do all in my power to assure that his and all other grandchildren will live under freedom, he arrogantly declared in substance, "You Americans are so gullible. No, you won't accept communism outright. But we'll keep feeding you small doses of socialism until you finally wake up and find you already have communism. We won't have to fight you. We'll so weaken your economy until you fall like overripe fruit into our hands."
The warning from the 1960s from the Secretary of Agriculture, Ezra Taft Benson: "We'll keep feeding you socialism until you realize you've already got communism."
Yeah, see, so, but that, didn't work. Now, my kids are that age. My oldest ones are in their 40s, and but they don't know about it. They don't learn it in school, and unless they learn it at home, they don't learn it at church, and unless they learn it at home, where are they going to learn it? And what's happened is that those of us who knew what was happening really had our hands full in trying to teach our children these kinds of things. It was very, very difficult. If we would have had the tower, if the tower had been built as the Lord had commanded, then it would have been a different story, because the church would have been able to help teach these things to our children. But as it was, actually, we with the fall of the Berlin Wall, we thought really, we had won, that capitalism had overcome communism. A lot of people thought that, and they let their guard down. There wasn't any more talk about communists, and yet they were on all sides of us in the guise of homosexual movements and so on. But the sham of arguing for equality under the 14th Amendment is not only evident in the deceitful ruling of those 5 lawyers. This is the point I'm trying to make. But it's also abundantly clear that the entire gay movement partakes of the same deceit, as we will see in a clip here later. I'm going to play part of a clip that will show that. But the point is that Khrushchev was actually right. And though the prophets have warned the people of the evil that was coming, the evil of communism has grown through the powerful cultural forces of the devil's Messiah, as they call it, the elite call it, where they conspire to employ the mass media and psychological manipulation through it to demonize their enemies and seduce more and more of the masses into departing from the faith that their forefathers once had in the living God of Israel. And so we see them turning away from God, turning really away from families. The fathers are depicted in the mass media as lame, and of course then all of the female seduction that goes on that is cast in the darkness of evil, in devil worship, and all these the milieu, if you will, of satanic forces and darkness. Everything from Ouija boards and mentioning those in songs and whatnot, and making them popular, to this latest demon thing. I don't know what it is, the pencils and stuff. I don't even know what it's about. I've just kind of seen it out of the corner of my eye. But also then at the Super Bowl halftime shows, where they've done the things that they've done, and they popularize that through the schools. It multiplies. you could do a whole book on how all that works, but the end result is to move the masses towards Lucifer and away from the God of Israel. And of course, the homosexual movement and the sympathy that is built up for that is a real big part of it that we don't understand. But now let's listen to another clip. This time it's Matt Staver of the Liberty Council, who's interviewed on a show called Crosstalk, and it was as a result of this Supreme Court decision. It was recorded after that took place, and so let's listen to what he has to say.
BCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at bcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Well, friends, as you know, this past Friday, the Supreme Court of the United States issued their 5-4 opinion, stating that, well, in essence, the 14th Amendment requires states to license so-called same-sex marriages. Justice Kennedy was joined by Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan in their desire to redefine marriage. The other four justices, Alito, Thomas, Scalia, and Roberts, dissented. And at the behest of White House senior advisor Valerie Jarrett, the White House was lit up at night with floodlights displaying the colors of the gay pride movement, in which they said in a statement, tonight the White House was lit to demonstrate our unwavering commitment to progress and equality here in America and around the world. They said the pride colors reflect the diversity of the LGBT community, and tonight these colors celebrate a new chapter in the history of American civil rights. Within just 2 hours of the decision by the Supreme Court, the U.S. Department of Education celebrated by posting an altered image of its own logo that included a rainbow on their Facebook page. Senator Ted Cruz called the recent Supreme Court ruling the darkest 24 hours in our nation's history. The American College of Pediatricians says, quote, "This is a tragic day for America's children." We're here to discuss the matter with us is Matt Staver, the founder and chairman of Liberty Council, an international nonprofit litigation, education, and policy organization dedicated to advancing religious freedom, the sanctity of life, and the family. Matt, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you.
Matt, we've got so much to talk about, but give us, first of all, your overall reaction to this court decision from this past Friday.
It's brought judgment on America. That's the only thing I can say. You've got 5 people who are 5 lawyers. I don't call them or consider them justices of the United States Supreme Court, although that's their technical title. But it's an opinion of 5 people. It's not an opinion that has anything to do with the Constitution. It's an opinion of 5 people that have thrown away millennia of human history and literally brought judgment upon themselves. And frankly, I think the nation, if the nation accepts what they have done, we need to not be silent, and we need to not pretend and play charade games that this is the rule of law. It is not the rule of law. It's an opinion of 5 people who happen to be lawyers, who happen to have a commission to be a judge at the Supreme Court. But that doesn't give them the right to just simply create new law consistent with their own opinions. They can have their own views. That's up to them. This is America. But they cannot force those personal opinions on the rest of America when it has nothing to do with the Constitution they are sworn to uphold. And that's really the essence of Chief Justice John Roberts' dissent. In his dissent, he said, just who do we think we are? He obviously was a dissenter. He's referring to these 5 justices. Just who do they think they are? And he also says that many people might celebrate this decision. He says, but do not celebrate the Constitution. It had nothing to do with it. He said this is a decision of 5 people's will, and it is not a legal decision. It's not based upon the Constitution, nor is it based upon our precedents.
Matt, you said in an early press release, quote, the court the court can no more redefine marriage than it can redefine gravity. Explain what you meant.
Well, I mean, it'd be silly for the justices, no matter if you had 5 or you had 9, or I don't care how many you have, to write an opinion to say, well, gravity was okay for the founders and that's what they believed in, but we've progressed beyond there. And we prefer that we want the liberty to be able to fly. We're frankly tired of not being able to fly and be confined to the ground. So we're going to write an opinion that the laws of gravity no longer apply to us. Now, you would laugh at that, say that's silly, that's nonsense. It's the same nonsense as if they were to say, as they did, that marriage, which is objectively, obviously, the union of the opposite sexes, of man and woman, that marriage is no longer just man and woman. It's two people of the same sex. In fact, there is a right in the Constitution. You have a constitutional right to have a state give you a marriage license to affirm your male-male, female-female relationship and call it marriage. That's absurd. Marriage, the union of a man and a woman, male and female, are part of the natural created order. Gravity wasn't created by any civil government. It doesn't depend on any referendum. It's not dependent upon the legislature or the courts, and it wasn't created by any organized religion. It's there. We affirm it. We understand it. We appreciate it. And the same is true for male and female, man and woman, in the union of marriage. It predates civil government. It wasn't created by a constitutional referendum or a citizen vote. Doesn't depend upon the legislature, and it sure does not depend upon 5 justices, or lawyers, I should say, using Chief Justice John Roberts' words. It doesn't depend upon their opinion. It's irrelevant what they think about it. And for them to now say that it no longer matters, that in a gender-specific relationship, gender is now irrelevant to that relationship, and that children can do just as well with 2 moms as they can with a mom and a dad, without any, background for that, maybe an amicus brief here or there. I mean, that's just absolute absurdity. It's as absurd as if they said gravity no longer applies.
Yeah.
To say that marriage is no longer just the union of a man and woman. You've got a right to have same-sex marriages.
The court has, in essence, indicated that the 14th Amendment provides for ruling the way they did on so-called same-sex marriage. Matt, if you would, just give us some education here. What is the 14th Amendment? And I really have to apologize for my own ignorance because I've never seen the word same-sex marriage in that amendment before. Did I just miss something in civics class?
No, the 14th Amendment is about due process of law. And Justice Thomas points that out, that it comes from the Magna Carta, that you can't be deprived of life, liberty, or pursuit of happiness without due process. What is due process? It's notice. You got to be noticed, and you have a right to be heard. So if someone wants to take your property, the government can't just take it. They have to notify you. Here's a notice because you're back behind on your property taxes. You're notified now. Now you got a right to come into court to defend it. Why are you back behind on your property taxes? Or maybe it was a mistake. You're no longer back behind. You never were back behind. It's a clerical error. You got a right to notice. You have a right to be heard. That's due process. That's the 14th Amendment. And it has nothing to do with same-sex marriage. And in fact, that's why Chief Justice John Roberts says this will do damage to our Constitution if these judges just have the ability to create out of nothing something of their own will, and has nothing to do with the Constitution. They mouth the 14th Amendment, but they don't actually use the 14th Amendment analysis. Say, for example, when we talk about equal protection or, a fundamental right, they completely ignore the precedent. And why? Because if they followed the court's precedent, they could not come to the conclusion they reached. For example, if you have a so-called fundamental right has to be something that is enumerated in the Constitution. What would that be? Well, freedom of religion is First Amendment, freedom of speech. That's a fundamental right. But if it's not enumerated, then it has to be so deeply part of our history and tradition that if you didn't protect that liberty, the very society would unravel. Well, there's very, very few things that would ever fall in that category. And the courts have said, you've got to be careful Otherwise, judges have freewheeling ability to create whatever they want to. You've got to look at it in history and tradition. Well, let's look at same-sex marriage or homosexual, same-sex rights in history and tradition. Was it deeply part of our history, part of our necessary liberty, such that if you didn't protect it, our society would unravel? No. It's been criminalized. It was called the crime against what? Nature, because it's unnatural. It's exactly the opposite of something that was historically protected.
So there we have, just like in last week's program, where John Price's book, we saw that how he documented the fact that what the communists falsely characterized as a campaign for tolerance and loving acceptance to homosexuals is actually a campaign that is designed to ultimately destroy Christianity. And now we see how it is a tool of the communists, and so you can really understand it. But that's exactly what the enemy does in the parable of the vineyard in D&C section 101. He comes in the night undetected and first breaks down the hedge of protection around the vineyard and the constitutional guarantee of freedom of religion and speech before scattering the Lord's servants and destroying their works and breaking down the 12 olive trees that have been producing so abundantly. What the servants did not understand, because they failed to keep the Lord's commandment to build the watchtower in the midst of the vineyard, is that a, quote, religion, unquote, of repressive tolerance, as Paul Kengor there has laid it out, has been used to destroy the First Amendment in the name of the 14th Amendment. And that once you understand that, everything becomes clear. This repressive tolerance, this selective tolerance, simply means redefining tolerance so that it applies to the enemy's values, but not to our own values, which are automatically and cleverly enough defined as non-tolerant. See, so even your own family then, and this brings to pass the scripture which says that a man's enemies will be the members of his own family, and the Lord made it very clear that it would be father against son, and mother against daughter, and daughter against mother-in-law, and so on, that would happen because they are able to redefine these things so that you automatically, those that don't support equality, support the gay movement, then they're not supporting equality. They're not tolerant. They're anti-tolerant, which means they're hateful, right? And so then their hateful speech ought to be banned, and their hateful religion ought to be destroyed, and so on. That's how it works. It's just incredible, but it makes a whole lot of sense once you understand it. Now we find ourselves in this awful situation, and some churches and some religious organizations are searching frantically for solutions. Again, reminding you of the parable that they come all of a sudden, and the servants of the Lord awake and are frightened and flee away. And that's what some are saying. They're saying, some are saying that there are solutions, but others are saying, no, there aren't. It's just too late. You have to leave the United Gay States of America, some have called it, and saying that the U.S. has stepped over the line and God's judgment is sure. John Hagee, for instance, says if God doesn't send his judgments upon America, he must apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah for destroying them. John Price says, we saw that last week, that the righteous must flee America, which he calls the daughter of Babylon, before the enemy destroys the church. Before God destroys Babylon, is how he put it. Rick Wiles has formed his Flowing Streams Church to continue his ministry to a Christian church that now must go underground, as he sees it. And so it goes. In the meantime, the First Presidency and the Quorum of 12 Apostles of the LDS Church have taken a stand, using accommodating language as far as possible, but nevertheless, they've taken an irrevocable stand against non-traditional marriage, stating that its priesthood shall not participate in same-sex marriage or use any of its facilities to host associated celebrations or activities. It was really funny. Did they read that in your ward, that letter yet, Roy? last Sunday? Well, if you can hear me and you get a chance, then just unmute your mic and come in at any time. But in our ward, the didn't even know I was in Priesthood Executive Committee meeting, PEC meeting, and I said, "Are you going to read the letter?" And he says, "What letter?" He didn't even know about it. What happened in your ward? Anything?
Well, I seem to on that 1 week. I had missed 1 week, but every sacrament I go to. So yeah, he read something, but maybe they did because it just happened.
Yeah, it was a letter that just went out, and all the bishops were told to read the letter, not in sacrament meeting, but in some other meeting, and discuss it with the members. And they were supposed to do that last Sunday or this coming Sunday.
They didn't do it last Sunday because it was sacrament, not sacrament. It was
Fast
testimony meeting. So I did
testimony meeting, but they're not supposed to do it in fast and testimony meeting. They're supposed to do it after or before in some other meeting. And that's what our bishop did is he read the letter in priesthood meeting, and then he gathered the adults that are in primary and in the cultural hall and read it to them. And then I think in Relief Society, one of his counselors read the letter there as well. So
on this week, so maybe that's why we didn't hear anything.
Yeah. All right. Well, you will hear then, but it was a little discouraging because in our case, they don't know anything about this stuff. It's like they live lives where all this is going on and they don't know anything about it. About the only comment I can remember them making, bishops that never asked for comments. There was no discussion. Of course, he said, if you want to discuss it, come to my office later. But the discussion or the comments that he made afterwards were just that, we see that's the way the world is. We love people, but they have to understand that we need to stand by our standards, and they're welcome, and all the accommodating emphasis is important to understand, but there's no recognition of what we're talking about here with this coupling of the enemy with the homosexual agenda merging into the communist agenda, which the prophets have said are the greatest threat to the work of God on earth. And of course, we see that it is. So anyway, I was a little disappointed in there, but I don't know what to do. How do you get them to see these things? If they had a meeting, a 2 or 3 hour meeting where they talked about it with their leaders, and it was something that the people could discuss, that would be one thing. But as it is, it's not going to happen, and so it's really distressing in some ways. But the stage is definitely set for the fulfillment of the parable of the Lord's vineyard. The persecution and suffering of the saints is never very far away personally, but now the enemy is more determined than ever to have his way with us collectively. We might ask with Eve, is there no other way? When she was presented with that choice, but the answer is still the same. There is no other way. Satan must have the freedom to tempt man and to take the wicked captive until the day he is bound by the knowledge, wisdom, mercy, and judgment of God. And that's the way it stands. So we'll see how it goes in the coming days. But anyway, I think that's all I have, unless you have something you want to add, Roy. Any comments that you would like to make? Well, it's a really dark and gloomy day, as many people have said. And I was in our fast and testimony. I was so, I won't even get into that. But anyway, if you don't have anything else to add, Roy, I'm going to go ahead and end it. And wish that everybody has a good day and that the Lord's choicest blessings will be with us all, is my prayer in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.